Hey everyone, Selwyn here from WynnStrength.com. On this video, I'm going to give you a quick tour of the garage gym. So I'll start off with probably the bread and butter of every garage gym should be the squat rack, or something to safely squat into, bench press out of, overhead press, and do some pull-ups too. So I have the Titan T3 full rack. I think it's a great budget option. I'll do a full review of this in a couple of months, but for the most part I've had it for about a year now and no real complaints. I've just been using the standard J cups and safety pins that come with the squat rack. I've loaded up over 400 pounds, probably around 440, 430, and haven't had any issues obviously with any breaking. The rack is still in one piece, so no real safety concerns there. I've seen the other videos online of Coop dropping 800 pounds on these things, so if you can drop 800 pounds, I'm pretty sure 400, 500 pounds are going to be fine. So as we all know with Titan Fitness, their quality control isn't the best, so when I first got it, the rack holes didn't line up, so the safety pins didn't go all the way across. So they did end up sending me an extra upright to fix the problem, which did end up lining up properly, and I did have a spare upright and didn't know what to do with it. So I ended up ordering a new cross member across the top, so then we extended it out sideways and then use it as a storage place. So in between the things, I'm able to use the extra bolts and add some hooks from Home Depot just to hang stuff, so the weight vest, all the bands, any other things that I find that I need to hang up there. The weight collars at one point were up there as well. And I've just spread out the weight hooks, the weight plate holders to the side there to keep them out of the way, just to make it easy to navigate and load the barbells. My working barbell is the Rogue Higher Power Bar. This costs about the same price as this. I would say if you were going to spend money like I did, I would recommend getting a more expensive barbell than a more expensive rack, simply because as long as this can hold the weight that you want to use, you're going to be touching this. This is going to be your interface with the weights, so I would spend a bit more money on the barbell rather than the rack. Moving on to the bench, I use a Rep Fitness flat incline decline 3000 bench. I have no complaints. It's a really solid bench. It comes in at 100 pounds. It's really solid. I've loaded up to 315 on the bench press and haven't had any issues with rattling or movement. I used to use a cheap Nautilus bench that I got second hand, and I wasn't trusting that with anything. So once I started benching a little heavier numbers and I got heavier myself, I didn't really trust that to handle the weight load. So this is really solid, super easy to adjust up and down. My one complaint, I think I said no complaints, but I do have one complaint, and that is it is hard to move around if you want to pick it up. When it is flat, you really have the only option to hold it by here and pick it up and try and balance it here, because when you try and pull this up, because it's not attached down, the top of the pad lifts up with you, so it makes it more difficult to carry around. Yes, it has wheels, but if you want to pick it up and move it across over stuff, which happens in a garage gym, you kind of get it over the mess. It's really difficult. So I did have some extra parts lying around from an old bench, which I attached to here. The nice thing is they all seem to use the same size bolts, which is really useful. So it's just the upright and a cross member, and all this does is it gives me something to pick up. It just gives me something to pick up so that when I want to pick it up, I can pick it up all in one go, and I have something to brace off of. It does remove the decline functionality, but I never used the decline feature of this, so it wasn't really an issue. If it is an issue for you, that's something to think about. So, because it is a garage that we use for stuff other than working out, I did put the curtains up here to kind of block the view of all of the storage containers we have and a bit of the mess that's lying back there. It kind of takes away from the videos. So really just cheap metal wiring from Home Depot, a couple of hooks that you put into the ceiling, and shower curtain holders and the cheapest curtains you can find at the dollar store. $5–10 to get that set up in a bit of time. And it just makes the space a little nicer and it stops the distractions from the background. Next up will be the platform. Homemade. It's an 8x8 platform. We pretty much just use alternating layers of 4x2, no, 8x4. Yeah, alternating layers of 8x4. Check out the blog where I have a write-up as to how I made this, but pretty simple construction. The one thing I would recommend, if you don't do any Olympic weightlifting, stick with rubber flooring for the entire surface. I wouldn't bother with the wooden middle section, just because when you are benching, your feet tend to slip on the wooden surface, which I'm not a big fan of. So if you're not doing any dynamic movements that require a wooden middle section, such as this, just go with a full rubber flooring. That saves you some energy while trying to bench and it stops you from sliding around or whatnot. Next up we have the extra odds and ends that kind of just lie around on the gym floor. So we have a punching bag, which I don't use anymore. So one thing I'd recommend is, if you are setting up your garage gym, try and keep it as small as possible to begin with until you figure out what you use and you don't use. Next up is the Hex Barbell. It was one of the cheap cap Hex trap barbells just off Amazon. Nothing really special about it. I'm not a big fan of using the trap barbell. If I could go back, I wouldn't have purchased it, but again, the things you learn along the way. And next we have a 100-pound sandbag from RX'd. This one's really cool. I use this for sandbag over the shoulders and some sandbag carries. It's been holding up quite nicely. I've been dropping it on concrete and the platform from shoulder height and higher, so haven't seen any real issues with fraying or tearing of the fabric, so that's really cool. We have battle ropes and the weight tire sled. Check out that video somewhere. I'll put a link for it. And so the weight plates that I use are just a mix and match of whatever I can get my hands on. I don't really have the funds to spend money on a complete calibrated set from Rogue or Leica or something like that, so it is just whatever I can find. My price point is generally 50 to 60 cents a pound for weight plates. You can get that used or online or at warehouse closing sales. I've had a fair bit of luck with closing down sales for some reason, so I'm able to pick up a lot of weights there. In hindsight, I should have bought more when I did, but you never know the opportunity when you see it. So it is just a mix and match of different weight plates from all the different places. I have weighed them. They weigh anywhere from 43 to 45.5 pounds, so I think without the calibrated plates you're going to be doing that anyway, so I'm not too concerned with the weight variance. It's really just 1 or 2 pounds a plate. And then moving further in, I just have the cheap dumbbell set from Costco, I believe, about $200. You get pairs of dumbbells in 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, as long with the weight stand, so they get used occasionally as well. I would probably recommend getting maybe adjustable dumbbells if you were looking for that, or if you could spend the money, get some Iron Master adjustable dumbbells. If you did have the space, obviously a full set of regular dumbbells is going to be great, but again, it comes down to the space requirements that you have in your house. So moving on to the next piece of equipment that we have is a homemade barbell storage device rack. It holds more than barbells just because I've had to put extra stuff on there. So we're starting off with my favorite accessory barbell would be the SS Yoke Bar by Elite FTS. I think if you had to buy an accessory barbell, this would be the first one to get. Next one, this is the first barbell I bought for the home gym. It is the Cap OB86. I think it's an alright starter barbell for the price point. If you can afford to get a nicer one, get it, but if you can't, then I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with this. I've deadlifted over 400 pounds with this, so no real issues of bending or anything like that. I've dropped it from shoulder height just to see what would happen with a bunch of weight. It's still working just fine. It's nothing special, but it does get you into the garage gym movement, so something I would recommend looking into if you're on a budget looking to get started with the gym. If you do upgrade, I would recommend keeping it because having 2 barbells allows you to train supersets and do things like deadlifts and bench press at the same time, so I really highly recommend getting 2 barbells if you can. And the next one is this training barbell. This comes in at 15 pounds. It's good for training people that aren't as strong and beginners, so I think it's a great way. This has a weight limit of like 75 pounds, so obviously once they hit that, you can move on to a regular 45-pound dumbbell. The other things that we store here are just the shoes, kind of take up the space there, some knee sleeves. I do have my Bluetooth speaker set up with the iPad and iPhone. Just as a stopwatch and timer as well, I just use Spotify. The dip belt kind of floats around, anything else just kind of floats around on here. So in typical DIY fashion, we did add extra stuff that might not be necessary, but I do have 2 sources of power to power the Bluetooth, as well as the iPad. You can also charge phones on here. For lighting, I just have a work light from Home Depot that just plugs into the side. So the reason there are notches here on the side was originally to hold the barbells sideways. Just because we're running out of space in the garage gym, I found keep them upright works as well for the structure, but it just keeps that width of it down, because instead of dealing with an 8 to 9 foot wide piece of equipment, now it's just 5 feet wide and pretty tall, so the ceilings can accommodate that height. So moving on to just the final piece of this on the back side here, we have just the Gladiator track system. I didn't want to drill a bunch of holes into the top, so this just has 4 screw holes to mount the track system, and then we just add a series of hooks. And then I just like to hang all of the weight belts there, the wrist straps, wrist wraps, slingshot, hip circle there, just for easy access, and it's out of the way because it's at the back of it. So that's that. It's also on wheels, so it makes it easy to move around as the situation's needed. So that's kind of cool. Almost forgot, the only piece of dedicated cardio equipment I do have is the Concept 2 rower. Great piece of machinery, but it is $1,000, so it is a fair amount of investment just for doing some rowing on. If you can afford it, get it. If not, look at another type of cardio equipment. And I don't think it's that necessary to have, obviously, but if you do have that, you can look at this or exercise bike. I don't know if you need a treadmill because you can just go outside. I don't have a lake, so I'm gonna get a rowing machine. I enjoy this mainly because it emulates a squat and a deadlift movement pattern. You're kind of getting the whole body in with the warm-up, and I just enjoy this over other forms of cardio. It is nice that it does stand up, so ooh buddy, watch out for lights when you do want to store this. So the cool thing with the rower is it stores upright in one pretty small footprint. It does take up a lot of room to move it in and out. It's about 8 feet long because it's pretty much as high as this room is. But if you do want to, you can take this apart. That's how they recommend storing it. I've stored it like this for months now, and it's no real issue. I guess the issue would be if you tip it over, but I think it's going to catch itself. In any case, this is fine to store it this way. So that about wraps it up for today. As of 2019, this is the state of my garage gym. Like any other garage gym owner will tell you, the garage gym is never finished because you're always wanting to add something else. And anyone that tells you it is finished is lying or doesn't know they're lying. So that's about it. That's all I have to work with. Even with limited equipment, you can get a lot of workouts done. I would say my one piece of advice would be to start off really slowly. Don't try and buy everything under the sun. Really think about what your training is going to be like, what movements you enjoy, what movements you hate, what your weaknesses are, what your strengths are. Just take a couple of months to plan this out, and don't just buy everything you see. Think about your purchase before you do it. Not necessarily for the monetary reasons, but mainly for the space reasons, because we're not in a 10,000 square foot facility. We have maybe a 10 by 10 foot piece of real estate to use. We only have so much room, so you really want to fill that small space with the most efficient and effective equipment for you personally. If you don't like doing certain movements, don't buy that piece of equipment. It's that simple. But I would suggest start slowly, otherwise you end up with random pieces of equipment that you don't use, that take up space that could be used for something else. So that's all I have for today. This has been Selwyn from WynnStrength, and remember, a better life through strength.